Hi, thank you for joining me for the first session in our series, Introduction to Puberty Education. I'm Wendy Sellers, a registered nurse and a certified sexuality educator, and the author of Puberty: The Wonder Years. Let's start by exploring ways to establish a safe and productive classroom climate where all students can learn. Students need to Maslow before they can bloom. This quote reminds us that students' basic needs must be met before they can learn. When students feel unsafe or disconnected from their school, their energy is drawn away from learning and instead focuses on survival. Some groups of students have not had their needs for safety and support met, which has resulted in lower academic achievement, higher dropout rates, and more health risk behaviors such as depression, suicide, substance abuse, and violence. Maslow's hierarchy is a psychological framework that explains human behavior. Basic physiological safety and belonging needs must be met before higher order learning can occur. Your resources include additional reading on Maslow's hierarchy of human needs. Bloom's taxonomy is an educational philosophy that explains how to increase student learning from mere memorization through higher order thinking and application. Your resources include additional reading on Bloom's taxonomy. The first thing to think about when teaching puberty education is self-assessment. You must know yourself first. The resource list has a self-assessment that you can do specifically about being ready to teach puberty education. For example, what are your beliefs and values? What are your biases? These will show up in the classroom if you aren't aware of how they can be revealed. Make sure that your instruction is bias-free. Second, what preparation have you had? Typically, teacher preparation programs don't include extensive training in health education or in puberty education. Do you want more training? If so, Puberty: The Wonder Years offers self-paced online training for those who would like to increase their comfort and competence. Also, it's important to address all aspects of puberty, not only physical changes. Students are changing emotionally, socially, cognitively, and physically. These changes are typical, but can be frightening if students aren't prepared. Another thing to think about is introducing yourself. If you come into the classroom as a guest presenter, it will be important to introduce yourself and help students get to know you to build that trust. And always keep the classroom teacher in the room if there's a regular classroom teacher and you're a guest. Tell the students something about yourself to build rapport and poll the group to get to know something about them. You definitely want to build that rapport. Of course, if you're the regular classroom teacher, you've already done these things. Next, you want to introduce the topic of puberty. You can do this by doing an icebreaker to get students thinking about the topic. Your resource list has a source for some icebreakers. You also want to assess their prior knowledge about puberty-related topics. In Puberty: The Wonder Years, we do an anonymous quiz and then reveal the group scores in a later lesson. This lets the students understand that there are still some things they can learn. You also want to normalize the diversity in puberty timelines and experiences, and acknowledge the range of feelings that your students may have about learning about puberty. This may go from discomfort and embarrassment to curiosity to excitement when talking about puberty. It's always important to introduce specific group guidelines when teaching a sensitive topic such as puberty. These would be an additional guidelines on top of your regular class rules. These have many names such as group norms, group agreements, class rules, etc. But they're designed to set clear expectations for student behavior. And more importantly, the ground rules provide safety for both students and the educator. These are the guidelines for discussion that are used in Puberty: The Wonder Years. They are explained and introduced in the first lesson of each grade level. I'll briefly go through each one. First, treat the subject seriously. We want students to approach puberty education with respect. Also, use humor appropriately. Let's face it, puberty can be funny, and so the class will laugh together, but it's important that the laughter not be at someone's expense or mocking what someone says or does. Also, use dictionary terms for body parts and functions. Now, your students will come to class with a lot of slang terms, and that's the only language that they have. So if a student says something using a slang term, don't get embarrassed, don't reprimand them. Accept the slang term and calmly explain what it is and give them the dictionary or medical or anatomical term and explain that from this point forward, we'll use that term instead of the slang term. Also, help your students respect other people and their ideas. There are as many ideas in the classroom as there are people. And so showing respect for that by listening, not laughing, and weighing the truth in other people's ideas. Also, it's important to have a ground rule for avoiding personal questions and stories. This will protect you and the students. You've all heard many stories from students that you didn't really want to hear, and they've named names. So tell them that if they have a story, they should not use real names, that they should say, I know someone who, and then make their report. Also, if a student asks a personal question of you, such as, well, teacher, how old were you when you had sex? You want to not answer that. Remind the students of the ground rule against personal questions and say something like, that's a personal question and I'm not going to answer that. And then turn the question into a third person question, because often students say, do you or did you? And what they really mean is, do people in general? So answer it in the third person by saying, that's a personal question, I'm not going to answer it, but many people have, and then answer it. Also, we want to let students know that they should ask questions. Questions are good. And then we need to treat all questions as good questions. And we will be talking about that in a later part of this series, how to answer student questions. But accept all questions as good questions and affirm the person who asked them. Next is avoid gossiping. That means we're not going to go out on the playground or on the bus or in the neighborhood and talk about what happened in puberty class. That means the teacher's not going to go to the teacher lounge and share what happened in puberty class. But it does mean that we want to talk to our trusted adults and tell our trusted adults what happened in puberty class and ask any questions of trusted adults that may come up. Always avoid telling the students that you will keep the conversations confidential. You do not have the legal right to confidentiality as a teacher or educator. Only doctors and lawyers do. And so avoid using the word confidential, but instead say avoid gossiping. And remind the students that you are a mandated reporter. And if someone says or does something that would give you an idea that they might be in danger or that someone else might be in danger, that you would have to get help in those situations. If you post the ground rules, you can refer to them as needed. So what happens if the group guidelines are violated? Because that does happen now and then. Don't ignore the violations. Pause the instruction. Remind the students about the group guidelines, especially the one that was just violated, without shaming the student who violated the guidelines. Speak very calmly and not in a shaming or judgmental voice. Reframe the incident and allow the students to settle down, and then go ahead and move forward with your lesson. Now it's your turn to plan how you will apply this information in your classroom. How will you set the stage for students to learn about puberty?